Can we have the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Boykin for the State Treasurer.
Ms. Ortega for the Director of Finance. State Controller Chung.
Good morning.
Chairperson Rosenstiel, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So let's start with the approval of the agenda. I would like to take the 3A and B off of consent so we can have some questions. Are there any other comments, questions on the agenda? Okay. I'm having a little computer problem here. Just one second. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Approval.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Great. The approval of the minutes from the June 5th meeting. Any comments, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. So our next item is the progress on the external financial auditor's report on internal controls corrective actions. So it says Robin as the presenter, but I don't see Robin, so. Okay, great, thanks, Larry. Oh, okay. Well, we can move to another item then until she's. Yeah, let's do that. Why don't we do we want to do? Are we ready to do the cybersecurity and then come back to 3A and 3B after that? Great, because that'll give her some time to. Jack, we're going to do cybersecurity presentation, so that'll give Robin.
She's presenting right now.
Yeah, so okay, that'll give her some time over there. Thank you. Great. Oh, we have somebody. Hi. Larry, were you going to introduce our guests, or would we can just have them introduce themselves?
I'll
Okay, great. Very good.
I'm Scott Terpel, the Information Security Officer here at CalSTRS.
Great.
And Scott, you gotta get your mic, so all of you just hit that button. And
There we go.
You guys can be broadcasting over the internet.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yes. No.
Okay. I'm Scott Terpelli, Information Security Officer here at CalSTRS. Joining me, the expert panel, we have Chris Cox, a partner at Weil, Gottschall, and Monges.
Good morning.
We have Russell Jones, a partner at Deloitte & Touche.
Good morning.
And remotely we have Bruce DeGrazia, Program Director, University of Maryland, University College. Can you hear us, Bruce?
Yes, thank you. Good morning.
Very good. They will be providing their own unique perspective on current cybersecurity risks, how to prepare and respond to those risks, and what a board's role and responsibilities are regarding cybersecurity. We're going to kick it off with Bruce, and he's going to give us an overview on the current cybersecurity landscape.
Thank you very much. When you don't look at this morning's paper, or yesterday's paper, to see that there is cybersecurity is a significant issue, and one that the board needs to be concerned with. What specifically with regard I have, three concerns, that I have, in the cybersecurity area that I think we should think about. The first one is, obviously access to members' information that you have, that you provide them. Anything that interferes with that, is obviously a problem. The second is, the breach and release data, the personally identifiable information that you all have in your system, must be immense, and would be a great interest to hackers who could then sell it on the black market or otherwise use it for identity theft. The third issue that may not be quite so obvious, but one I think that is coming to the forefront, is investment banking. Now, I don't know the entire portfolio of CalSTRS. I do know that, for example, that you invest in a lot of blue chip stocks, and one of them jumped right out at me, and that was General Electric. Now, General Electric gets hacked probably hundreds of times every day. Not so much because they're trying to shut down the organization, or even if it's because they're trying to steal personally identifiable information, but because there are, particularly from China, they're looking for intellectual property. The reason this is of a concern, and one need only look at Home Depot in today's newspaper, is that, one of the points that was made about Home Depot is that 99% of the stores for that company have probably been affected by the breach of data. Now, I ask you, how is that going to affect the stock and the stock price? And if you're invested in it, which presumably a number of people and organizations are, how is that going to affect your portfolio? So those are the three issues that I think that the board needs to think about.
Okay. Do you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Sure. This is Chris Cox speaking. So the important points that Bruce were making was what's the type of information you're trying to protect. But you also need to be thinking about where the sources of the hacks are coming from, and they're coming from everywhere. And it's important for everybody to understand that we're not in a situation where somebody's breaking the window and grabbing something from the store and running away. What we have is advanced persistent threats out there. And what they do is they get into a system unknown and they sit there and they glean information. And what we see is here for the Home Depot situation, they're just stealing personal data and then they're selling it off on the black market. And when you have your credit card canceled, you have no idea where the hackers got the information to use your credit card. And so it's really important to understand that the hackers are sophisticated, they're very well funded, and they never stop. And so it's very important for the board to be thinking about when you're protecting your assets that you're on constant alert and you're always testing your system all the time, because you never know when the hack happened, and it could sit there for months and months and months without you knowing about it. And so you have to be aware of this threat on a regular basis, and you have to have a program in place to be testing your system all the time and testing your vendors and testing where your investments are to find out what everybody's doing to protect information and how vigilant they're being.
Russell, anything?
Yeah, I would just add that, if you look at, we talk about hacking and hackers. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was really kids, right? It was kids that trying to test out their skills. Now we're really talking about nation states that are coming after us, right? We all know what's going on in the Middle East and other parts of the world. These attacks now against our economy are coming from other countries as part of larger cyber warfare. So it's gone beyond even breach of personal information, protected health information. A lot of my clients, particularly in the private sector, are being attacked for intellectual property and theft of trade secrets. So think of other countries that want to leapfrog maybe, a device manufacturer, and 5 years of R&D within a year by basically stealing all of their stuff, all of the clinical trials, all of the data and designs and the like. So that's really what it's risen to the level of. And so the point is, from a board perspective, recognize cyber risk and cybersecurity incidents as another business risk that should be looked at and managed the same way you would manage strategic or operational or financial risk.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. So, did you have anything else?
I was just giving Bruce a little lag time if he had anything else to say because he's on video.
Yes, I did want to talk. Thank you. I did want to mention something about the role of the board and ways to protect yourself. One is the technical one. You have very good cybersecurity people working for the organization. One of the things that they are undoubtedly doing is have penetration testing done for the on the system, and to determine where the weak spots are, where the vulnerabilities are. And the other thing is that I teach cybersecurity policy. And many of these, and I think my colleagues will confirm this, many of the breaches are not because of hackers that are so technologically savvy that they can go in and find a new program or a new virus. It's a matter of failures of policies and personnel that will click on an email, phishing email, and allow this virus or other malware to load in. And that's one of the things that a good penetration tester will test not only the technical side of things, but also practice social engineering as well. And that needs to be done constantly, and your policies need to be updated. And anytime somebody enters or leaves, they need to be made aware of those policies. Finally, what I do want to say is there's a new framework coming out of NIST. It used to be the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's a cybersecurity framework that has guidelines on cybersecurity approaches. Not only should the board be looking at that for the organization, but for any organization, any company in which they invest, they should be asking the question, are you complying with the framework? What are you doing? If you are not, why not?
Thanks, Bruce. I'll pick up from there because I think that leads into our next question. And just to amplify Russell's point about this being a risk management issue for the board, you have to think about the costs associated with hacking. It's not simply the cost of investigating the hack, it's the cost of complying with data breach notification laws, the potential threats from lawyers, lawsuits, FTC investigations, Attorney General investigations, and very importantly, the reputational harm that can come to an organization when it gets hacked is tremendous. And it's very important from a public perception perspective that you're on top of the ball here, because once the public loses faith, the cost of that is immeasurable. It's not simply paying money to make something go away because you bought a new program. So the risk is real, and it needs to be dealt with seriously. And Bruce's point is a great one. So the way I like to look at this, and we'll talk a little bit about, well, what do we do? Okay, we have this threat out there. Well, what do we do about it? The first thing is what Bruce brought up, which is the NIST, pursuant to executive order from President Obama, came forward with this framework. And the framework basically discusses how to build a program where you're identifying your cybersecurity posture and what your risks are. You're developing safeguards to protect against the threats. You're detecting cyber events. You're responding, and you're recovering from a data breach. And what that does is it sets a basic standard of care. It's not a binding framework, but if you ever find yourself in a lawsuit because there was a hack and you're accused of being negligent, the first thing a plaintiff's lawyer or an investigator is going to do is pull out the NIST framework and say, what did you do to comply with this? And that's why it's very important now that we talk about what we should do as an organization to implement a plan. And we have a few recommendations that we can make. And the first one is understanding as a matter of organizational culture that a cyber hack is not an if situation, it's a when situation. And we had Mike Rogers from the House Intelligence Committee, he's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said there are two kinds of companies, those that have been hacked and those that have been hacked but don't know it yet. And it's important that we all understand that, moving forward. So what do we do? Well, what we do is we first form a team. Before there's a security breach, the first thing you need to do is basically what you're doing now, which is figuring out what data do you have that's important and needs to be protected because it's interesting to someone out there that wants to make use of it, whether it's trade secret information, whether it's personal information of retired teachers, whatever it is, your financial information, identify that. And then implement the program where you first protect and encrypt all the data. I'll tell you a story. Law firms, right, have tremendous amounts of confidential information of their clients. And we, a couple of years ago in my law firm, we tested the system, and we hired ethical hackers to test our system, and they were able to get past a remarkable percentage of the passwords being used. So we as an organization said, wait a minute, we need to change. We're going to implement new standards for encryption, for password protection, to make sure that we stay one step ahead. And so that's the first thing you need to do is have a policy internally, and this is what Bruce was talking about making sure that one of your employees isn't the person to inadvertently forward on some malware. What are you doing to protect the system? And that's one of it, is you need to do a bottom-up review of what your policies are, what you're doing to protect data. Then, of course, everyone should be using the technology available, for monitoring and protecting your system. And that's easy enough to do. But as I mentioned earlier, you do have these advanced persistent threats, and what you need to do is constantly test your system, and you should be hiring outside people to see what's residing in the netherworld of your servers and on the cloud. Got to test the system on a regular basis, and you have to train your employees about it. But an important aspect for you folks to think about is vendors. Vendors that you might use to store any of your information, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on servers, whether it's IT people. There are a lot of people that have access to confidential personal information for CalSTRS. And what are you doing to make sure that your vendors are implementing a plan, right? And you need to be looking through your licenses with the vendors to understand, is there a requirement that they have a cybersecurity plan? Is there a requirement that they have an incident response plan? Who bears the liability in the case of a hack? Who's going to bear the cost of notifying the authorities or whoever else needs to be notified in the event of a cyber attack? All those things need to be thought about and talked about with your vendors right now. Something you can do right now. Sure.
So I appreciate the comments. If you're sitting where we are, right, and because I'm trying to think about how we're supposed to think about it from our seat, right? So a lot of constructive comments, but I don't have a structure for it, right? So the professor mentioned the framework's important. You isolated at the beginning what needs to be protected. Secondly, what program do you have in place, right? Then are you following policies? Then it has to be bottom up. Can you tell me if I'm talking to STRS staff in this particular area, how I ought to be thinking about this? What questions need to be addressed by the board, constantly followed by the board, right? Because we know that there's constant attacks, so that we're doing this appropriately.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was actually a point I was about to get to, which is you need to form a team with people that have clear lines of responsibility. And it should probably be, an officer or a board member responsible for it, but it needs to be a multidisciplinary team that is, one, responsible for taking steps before a hack, and also, two, is going to respond when it happens. And it's not a situation where the board needs to monitor on a regular basis, but I do think from a board perspective, what you need to do is create the multidisciplinary team, and that would be decision makers, people with responsibility, the person you call when something happens, IT people, legal teams, PR people. You need to put a team together, and they need to come up with a plan for you that the board will approve, and then someone needs to have oversight to make sure that it gets implemented. And then whatever is appropriate for the board, a regular reporting schedule, quarterly, biannually, annually, about what the team is doing and what you're doing for monitoring, and in the event of a hack, how was the plan implemented after it happened?
And then if we identify hacks,
Protecting the organization from outside hackers, but also the other point I made, which was with regard to your investments, the CalSTRS needs to, when they're thinking about making a major investment in a company, asking the question about what type of cybersecurity plan they have and whether they're compliant. The vendors, that's an excellent point. Vendors are a very weak spot, but so are your investments.
Very good point, but it does come with training. And so from a board perspective, approving guidelines for training employees, making sure that there's something in an employee handbook that says you're not to disclose confidential information, you're supposed to comply with our password policies, whatever it is, but you need to institutionalize and make it part of the culture that everyone's responsible for, protecting the data. And when you have to defend yourself in the event of a hack, you look like you behaved like a responsible organization because you did have a plan in place. And then the last point I'll bring up and let Russell speak a little bit is when a hack inevitably happens and you discover one, it's important that the incident response team, which has been previously formed, is ready to act in hours and days, not weeks and months. And so there needs to be someone designated, a decision maker high up that can call balls and strikes when this happens, so that you're out on the public relations front, you're isolating malware and rectifying whatever the problem was, and that you're ahead of the response and you're ahead of the public, so that you can help control what the message is. And the message is always, we thought about this, it was inevitable, these people are sophisticated, they got through, but we're on top of it.
Can I say something? I don't know if it's going to be covered anywhere in the presentation, but at some point, if it is, can somebody address the legal liability and where the onus rests in the event of a hack?
Okay, I'm going to make my comments and then probably toss that one back to Chris. So I've got 3 specific recommendations for the board, but I'm going to preface it to say, everyone's familiar with the JP Morgan hack. JP Morgan, Chase got hacked very recently, Home Depot got hacked. Common theme that we've seen is that the hack already happened. It was some routine security testing that revealed that JP Morgan had already been hacked and infiltrated by some group, some foreign group that had gotten into the systems. And the same thing at Target, and it's the same thing we see over and over again. But here's the point. When you plan and prepare for risk, managing risks such as a fire, right, or a flood, some kind of catastrophe, the event happens, right? The fire happens, and it's done. And now it's all about recovery. You have a plan, and you go into recovery mode. Cyber attack is different because it may be an ongoing event. You may discover we've been hacked and they're still hacking us. And so the whole response to dealing with containing the hack dealing with the media, dealing with your constituents, dealing with law enforcement. It's all happening very quickly. It's very messy. I've been involved with some of these with some of our clients, and it's a fast-moving, not fun experience that goes on, right? And at the same time, you've got, media that's distorting the facts, maybe mispresenting the facts. You've got your customers, your constituents calling. You've got a lot of things going on very quickly. So my point is, and I'll get to my recommendations. From a board perspective, I think the first recommendation is what I said earlier. Accept the fact that cyber risk and cybersecurity incidents is a business risk that you've got to manage, just like you manage any other type of risk. Along with that recommendation, make sure you have consensus among the board and among the leaders of CalSTRS about what cybersecurity is. Because I got to tell you, it's such a misused term now in the media. None of my clients really have, no three people agree on what cybersecurity is. So I think that's important that you gain consensus about what it is so that you now, to Chris's point, have teams that are built around scenarios and attacks against the organization that are cybersecurity attacks, and you've got the right plan. Second recommendation, continue to have these type of meetings at the board. And I would recommend to have it semi-annually. That's what I see at a lot of other clients, especially in the banking world, because cybersecurity and cyber risk is such a fast-moving target, right? As technology changes, the hackers get smarter, right? You may hear when your risk management folks talk about security versus compliance. I can make you compliant with a standard, but it doesn't mean you're secure, because the standard maybe was developed 5 years ago with a set of controls that are already outdated. The hackers are 3 steps ahead, 5 steps ahead. So make sure you continue to have these type of meetings. You can get updated, semi-annually on what the actual cyber risks are to the organization. And if you don't have a subcommittee already around cybersecurity, maybe establish one. Maybe as part of your overall risk management organization, which is what I've seen a lot of other companies and organizations do. You already have a chief risk officer. It should fall in that area. My third recommendation, get answers to the following questions. First question is, how would CalSTRS respond today if you discovered you had a major cyber attack that had occurred? And that gets back to my earlier point. When this actually happens, the things are moving so quickly, there's a lot of confusion. I mean, a lot of the times, organizations can't even determine it's a cyber attack, right? They're spending days trying to figure out, was this an attack? Was this just some system downtime? What was this, right? So get a plan in place. As Chris said, have a team that's established that has worked through scenarios. In fact, what we're seeing more and more now in the private sector, and especially in banks, cyber wargaming. So are you familiar with an exercise called Quantum Dawn 2? If not, you maybe look it up. Last summer, the financial services industry got together, some of the major banks, the brokerages, the stock exchange, and conducted a simulated cyber attack, a coordinated cyber attack against our banking industry to understand how would leadership respond? Who would decide when the exchange would be brought down? What would be communicated to the public, to the regulators? And it was a very interesting exercise what came out of it that helped the banks better prepare for and manage that risk. So that would be the other recommendation. And then the last question is, how resilient would CalSTRS be subsequent to a cyber attack? So by resilient, meaning, how quickly can you recover and continue to do business in a way that allows you to still achieve your objectives? So we talk a lot about being secure, vigilant, resilient. Everyone's been doing security for a long time. Security is about controls and policy and procedures. That's great. Then there's vigilant, looking out, over the horizon, having a capability to understand who are the threats out there. Somebody targeting us, somebody targeting the board or executives that try to, launch spear phishing attacks, for example, to get into the organization, steal information, impact investment decision, et cetera. And then, finally, the resilient piece is, okay, we've had the attack. How well do we recover to continue business as normal? Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Russell. So there are a couple of things I'd like to get to your question about the legal risk. First, there are compliance rules. There's no overarching federal law that governs a reporting in case of a data breach. But for an organization that is holding on to personal information of a lot of people, you have to make sure that you comply with, first of all, the reporting rules. There's 47 different states, all have different reporting requirements, different thresholds for reporting, different dates for reporting, who do you report to, what do you report. California, it is Civil Code Section 1798.29, and that requires state agencies to disclose any breach to any California resident whose unencrypted personal information was or is reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person. Very, very broad standard. So the first thing you have to think about legally is what laws out there do we have to comply with? The second one is lawsuits. This is a hot issue. There's a very deep pocket here, which makes you a target-rich environment for plaintiffs' lawyers. And but what we've seen most of the time is that it's difficult for plaintiffs to establish harm because a lot of times their personal information was acquired, but there's really no damages. And so what we've seen in analyzing the different lawsuits throughout the country is that half of them get dismissed and half of them are settled because usually the plaintiffs are made whole and they don't have an injury. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. But basically the allegations for a lawsuit are generally negligence, breach of the unfair business laws, and failure to exercise your duty or fiduciary duty of a board member for failing to adequately protect the assets of the organization. And that's basically where the lawsuits come into. If that answers your question.
I might add something as well, a couple of things. One is if you look at the healthcare industry as an example, they are heavily regulated, and there are laws concerning data breaches. But one of the defenses to liability of the government, for example, in the case of a breach, is if the information has been encrypted. If you encrypt your data, then that is an excellent defense. Now, warn you, of course, and my colleagues will concur, I'm sure. Encryption takes a while. It costs money to do it, but it is an excellent defense. The second thing I would recommend that you look into is cyber risk insurance. The market is still, it is very early stages because the insurance companies are still feeling their way around, but it's something to seriously think about.
That's a great point. And I think, from a practical perspective, the two things is what Russell was saying is worth re-emphasizing, which is you have to identify what's really important. What are the crown jewels? And you need to prioritize things because this is a big amorphous problem. And so what you need to do is start prioritizing. And Bruce's point about encrypting data is a good one, which is someone needs to identify exactly what is truly important that we need to prioritize right now? And then maybe that is the first step for encryption. And then cyber insurance is an important thing to think about. I think when I've looked at the cyber insurance landscape, it's all over the map. I don't think the industry has really matured, but there are a lot of different options out there that will provide coverage for certain things like reporting, for remedial measures, those types of things, and the costs fluctuate a lot. So I don't think we've settled into a very mature market yet, but there are a lot of options out there and a lot of different packages that are worth investigating.
Can I ask a question? And this is really a question directed to Brian, our chief counsel. So if I were somebody who wanted to hack CalSTRS, I might look on the website and realize that there was a agenda item on cybersecurity, and I'd be watching right now. As a result, I'm a little reluctant to ask a lot of questions that I have an interest in, but that person who might want to hack us might also have an interest in. And maybe they already know, but if that's probably likely, they know a lot more about our system than I do. But I need to know more about the system. So, given that, can we have these oversight meetings in executive session, or do they need to be broadcast over the internet?
Actually, it's an excellent question, and as we were preparing this and we were discussing this, so what you're not going to hear is you're not going to hear in open session from your information security officer how we as an organization are specifically addressing all these threats. And as Mr. Cox conveniently pointed out, there's a serious threat of litigation here. And since there's a serious threat of litigation here, it is appropriate to have these kind of discussions in closed session, because we cannot lay out our defense in depth, which is the term that Scott has taught me, out in open session, because then we're, as you said, then we're making ourselves especially vulnerable. And so when we looked at this from the CalSTRS point of view and information security point of view, we thought this was an excellent presentation to you to allow you to ask those kind of questions and certainly to require us to answer them to your satisfaction. And so we would expect that that would be the next follow-up piece, and the majority of that would have to be in closed session because of the vulnerability, because of the serious threat of litigation.
Okay. So the concept that Mr. Jones has suggested about semi-annual oversight meetings, discussions by this board, that would be something that we could be scheduling into the ARM committees, but in a closed session portion of the meeting?
I think you could have both, because what I heard from the panel was to get a report on the state of where we are and what's happened, and if there are, if we've had any incidents or what's going on in the industry. And then I think the closed session is, okay, what are we doing to address that? What are the lessons learned? What additional systems, staff, procedures have we put in place that we don't want the rest of the world to know about?
And but I can add to that, I think what you can also use those meetings for, similar to this panel, is education to the board. For example, spearfishing. Do you all know what that is? See, it's a great topic, because as a board member of CalSTRS, you could be targeted, right? Someone or a leader of CalSTRS could be targeted, and a spearfish is just a fancy way of saying you receive an email that looks really like something from Bank of America, or whoever your bank is. And it says, we need some additional information, we're doing a survey, click here. And you click there, and then nothing happens. And you're like, what was that? And what happened was a piece of software got downloaded to your laptop, and now they got you. They're gonna use your laptop to get into the network and jump off from there to attack your systems. That's probably one of the biggest issues right now we see. If you look at a lot of the recent attacks, cyber attacks, it always ends up as a spearfish attack. Someone's laptop got compromised because they got an email that looked really real from some organization that they wouldn't expect it to not be a real email, right? And you click the link and you're done at that point. So I think the semi-annual meeting that I was, cyber risk discussion that I was talking about, those kind of topics can come up to educate the board, along with what's going on in the landscape. What is happening out in the world now that would, impact either CalSTRS or, as Bruce said earlier, investment decisions that you might think twice about, given what's happening with the companies that you're investing in.
Very good points. And we always talk about cyber attacks, but there's always a human element to it, which is Russell's point. I like to think of it as cyber threats, right? Because we have spam filters, and I can't tell you how many times we've seen someone found something in their spam filter and opened it anyway. And so despite the best technology, you have human intervention, which causes a lot of trouble. But I think, given Russell's point is a very good one, the threat is constantly changing, and we're always one step behind these very sophisticated, very well-funded, very persistent people. And to have a semi-annual update on what the landscape looks like is something that makes a lot of sense.
Any questions?
You want to talk about the...
Joy, we have a question from a board member.
Thank you. Yeah, so, in addition to the threats that we've talked about, specifically with the information that we hold here, you've also talked a little bit about looking at this in terms of our investment risks, as part of how we evaluate and prepare for those. Are there certain types of industries that are more susceptible to cyber attacks or cyber threats?
Yes.
Okay.
You probably all speak to that. Go, Bruce.
I came out of the Defense Department, so this is subject to know a little bit about. And defense is, those industries are the ones that are among the first to get hacked, because you can get, of course, intellectual property and technology from them, and you also can affect national security. So they're tremendous targets. Now, one of the points that I'm going to make is, you look at a Lockheed Martin, you look at a Boeing, the huge defense contractors, and they have people who's on staff whose every waking moment is concerned with cybersecurity and protection of the data. It's the next tier down that are really the ones you have to worry about, because they have much of the same data that the first tier companies have, the primes have, and yet they may not have the same kind of security that a Boeing or a Northrop Grumman would have. And that, if I were a hacker, that's the place I'd look.
To add to that, healthcare and life sciences is an industry that's under constant attack. So I spend a lot of time in the healthcare life sciences space working with biotech, medical device manufacturers, healthcare providers. So you may have heard recently, a week ago, there was a hack against that was disclosed against Community Health System. 4.5 million, patient records were exposed, but the hackers didn't get any PHI, protected health information. They were after something else. And so it was interesting. I was talking with an executive at one of my clients that's a medical device manufacturer. And obviously, that's what they do. They sell devices to the healthcare providers, like Community Health Systems. And he asked, why would a foreign entity be interested in healthcare here in the U.S.? What is so valuable? And I said, well, it's a pretty interesting question, but think about it. Some of the largest health systems in the U.S. have some very valuable data. If you've done 1 million hip implants and you've created a registry for that, pharmaceutical companies would love that information. Device manufacturers would love that information because it would help them validate future products, the design of those products, and the efficacy of those products. So, this is my own personal opinion, but I think that's why we've seen a rise over the last year of attacks against device manufacturers, biotech companies, and actual not-for-profit healthcare systems here in the U.S. A lot of this flies under the radar. You don't really hear about it in the news because everyone gets and is interested in a sensational Target hack where it was credit card information. But I think this is the next wave, to be honest about it.
Yeah, I'll just add my 2 cents to that, which is, I think that's right. What we hear about are the consumer-facing companies that get hacked, and that's a big target for any financial institution or consumer-facing company which has personal data for their customers. They're ripe targets because you can sell that data, the credit card information, social security numbers, those types of things, make a lot of money. The other aspect that Russell was talking about, I think, cuts across all technology. There's a constant threat for trade secret information because you can cut your development time.
Right.
by a whole lot if you just get at someone's processes, whatever it is, data, reporting data on fail rates, those types of things. And so there's a ton of information out there, but it usually falls into two buckets as far as I see, which is personal financial information in one bucket and technology in the other bucket.
And to add to Chris's point real quick, the problem with the trade secret theft, intellectual property theft, cyber attack happens today. And this has happened to a few of my clients in that space. They steal a bunch of stuff, designs, product launch plans, and all that, those type of things. It may not be until 3 years later that now they start to see top line growth. They're wondering, why is our revenue dipping in certain parts of the world? And it's because now that product that, whoever stole the information leapfrogged the development efforts of the company here in the US. But you may not see the actual impact to top line growth for 2 to 3 years when those products hit the market at a fraction of the actual cost for consumers.
Did you have a follow? Grant?
Thank you. Thanks for this presentation. You're here talking to us today, and I think it's clear that most of us don't have a good sense of what the risks are, but I was just wondering if you had a sense in terms of investors in general. Have there been shareholder initiatives to try and get companies to adopt policies around cybersecurity? Is there sort of a growing movement, or is it not?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen that as much in the pre-hack situation. We obviously see the shareholder litigation coming after something bad happens and it affects the stock price. But we haven't seen a big push publicly for that as far as I know. But it's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I can't say that I can either answer that one. Bruce?
I have not seen it yet, although I've heard rumblings about it, and I think that that shareholder groups and with all due respect to my litigator colleague here, some of their lawyers are looking at that idea.
Yeah, and the other thing too to keep in mind is what a company is actually doing to implement their cybersecurity practices is highly confidential information, very valuable to the hackers, and so that happens behind closed doors.
But I guess I'm just thinking we're widely invested in the market, and so to have that granular look as one individual investor, I think unless there's some movement with other shareholders, it's going to be hard to really make a dent and get companies to adhere to policies.
Bob, did you have?
But I think that and sorry for interrupting, but I think that the simple question of are you complying with the NIST framework is a good one to ask.
Thank you.
And I think in certain cases, certain industries are regulated. So financial services, healthcare, they have security standards and regulations in place that they have to comply with today.
Bob, you had comments or questions?
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I think that it was wise for the board to ask for this presentation. It's clear that there's a lot to think about. And I thank the presenters for a really wonderful presentation. And I'm certainly not suggesting it conclude by any means. Well, rather, in the spirit of pushing things forward and offering some concrete suggestions, I think the board first needs to grapple with, is this something that we want to give, that you want to give bandwidth to? It's not like you don't have enough to do, your plate's full, there's a lot to do. And one question is this a risk that's sufficiently high to displace something else or to make room for? My opinion would be yes. And then the next question that you have to grapple with is, which committee would the reports be brought to? Would it be the ARM committee, limited to the ARM committee, or should it be the full board? My recommendation would be, at least initially, I think the ARM committee is well placed to take these reports up. And then at some time in the future, if you fell, of course, you could always bring it to the attention of the full board. But that, again, is your choice. And so my recommendation would be that if you agree that this is an important risk, and I believe it is, that something along the lines of what was brought up, which is a report that would be brought, to the extent it can be, offline, and for the ARM committee to gain a broader understanding of what are the apex risks that are being faced by CalSTRS, what is being done to mitigate those risks, and to think about what future risks may be brought up. There's things obviously being done at CalSTRS. It's not a vacuum, of course, but it would be, I think, a good idea for the board to get a handle on where CalSTRS is with respect to the issues that these gentlemen have brought up today. And if a closed section is appropriate, I think that's appropriate. But I think the board should make some decisions about where should this be part of your plate, whose plate it should be on, and what it should look like. Thank you, sir.
John?
Bob, can you further elaborate? So if we put it on the plate, what would we have less of on the plate?
Yep. Thank you for saying that, because that's the world we live in with respect to risk management, is that you're always making trade-offs and choices. And I hate to throw this back to you, sir, but it is the board's choice to decide what you would take off the plate if you're going to replace it with this. And that would involve some careful thought, and I'm certainly not going to shoot from the hip on that regard. Or you could just expand.
Can I rephrase the question then?
Certainly.
What are the highest priorities, or because you're a consultant, that we ought to be focused on now? And what are areas of lesser importance?
Wow. So you're asking me to shoot from the hip on a pretty big question, sir. But okay. Well, that's why you pay me, right? Protecting the fund. Protecting the fund, number one. Number two, delivering high-quality customer service. And so I think those two, that's the ball. Keep your eye on the ball. And other things are important. Everything's important. But those rise pretty high. And in my mind, cybersecurity can play an important role with respect to, look, I see lots of risks with respect to cybersecurity, but one certainly would be disruption, operational disruption that could occur. If member data gets out, that's not good, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But disruption of someone's payment or disruption of inflow of cash, that is a bad thing. And so I think cybersecurity can affect those two most important missions. And so that's why I believe it should be a part of something that's brought to the board, even if it crowds out something else.
All right. Sorry. I'm just going to keep throwing questions
Bring
at
it
you
on.
because I'm trying to. What can we be more efficient at? Right. Let's say we do dashboards or methodology that we can change so that we can continue to identify things, address them properly in the time period given to us, are we just going to have to bump something, or can we just do things differently?
Or just do more, or just recognize that the world's getting more risky and the role of our audit and risk management committee is getting larger. These things would need much more careful discussion than I think I'm willing to dive into. And
Yeah, I think we already sort of have a structure in place for how we're dealing with. Maybe Cassandra, you can comment on that.
Right.
I think it's already actually in Brian's.
Exactly. We have, and we're going to be reporting on it at the board later today, that we do have the information security identified as an enterprise risk in our enterprise risk assessment. And we have activities listed within that report around information security, and some of it would be cybersecurity. So there are a lot of mitigating strategies, activities within that report. So I'm thinking maybe that would be something that we can augment or, do more of, maybe in a off session, if it would be part of a closed session, that we could just include within that reporting cycle. Because we meet quarterly and we report semi-annually to the board on that risk report.
And I know this is in conflict with what Dr. Evans said in terms of placement, but we already have a biannual reporting function on the overall risk management process and results. So possibly we could be rotating those high priority risks in terms of deeper discussion through that already agendized item.
it's a full board.
It's full board, yeah. So again, just,
It's full board open session, so we would.
right,
have
so
to-
again,
we're
based
going
on the
to-
conversations that we've had here, it may require that we re-strategize the placement or the open versus closed reporting so that we could get into more of a dialogue about the persistent threats and the actual specifics associated with that.
And then if I could, so Russell made comments earlier that no three people define cybersecurity the same way. So when we have that conversation, can we make sure that we understand from our perspective what's included in cybersecurity and that the measures we have in place address what we think we're at risk for?
Well, I think.
And I'd like to add, I'm sorry, as your general counsel, I see this as one of the major risks to the organization. And so I do think it requires board attention, and it should be a priority. The Information Security Office is under the Office of General Counsel, so I'm telling you that this is something that's growing geometrically, this risk, and it comes in very different formats. We have electronic discovery risk, we have litigation risk, we have cybersecurity risk, and it's just something that's growing. So I do think it's an important item for the organization, and certainly as your attorney, I think it's an important item for you to at least get some satisfaction that staff is addressing it appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way we're dealing with risks now, we have 9 major categories. We have a lot of sub-risks within those. We get a semi-annual report to the board, and it's agendized for 15 minutes for all 9 topics. Okay, so and cybersecurity is just, one of those 9, or information security, which is broader than just cybersecurity. So I think it might be appropriate when we have the conversation about the risk management report at the full board to discuss or mention this presentation and suggest that we either pull that out as an item of particular focus for the full board, or that the full board consider allocating or identifying the ARM committee as responsible for that more in-depth oversight. But I think both based on what Brian is saying, what Bob is saying, what our expert panel members are saying, this is an issue that we probably need as a board to be spending a little bit more time at than we are right now. I don't know if we have anybody on the committee who has a different opinion, but I think if not, that would be a discussion, I think, this afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be an appropriate way to do it? Okay. Any other questions or comments? This has been extremely useful in terms of highlighting for us some of the issues that we definitely need to be concerned about, and the breadth of how it affects or can affect the organization. So it's been extremely useful. Anything else? Well, great. Well, thank you, all 3 of you, as well as staff, for putting this together. It's been really a privilege to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.